So at the end of the day, every market is heterogeneous. No market is homogeneous. So in other words, every market consists of, at least four, sometimes five distinct groups of people who have very unique sets of requirements as it relates to the product or service in question. And so really at the end of the day, what market research and analytics and data more generally allows us to do is to personalize outreach and personalize service.
Welcome to the Marketing Rapport, a podcast created for and by marketing professionals who seek to better understand their consumers and design unique, personalized experiences that stand out in today's market. In each episode, hosts from Verisk Marketing Solutions connect you to industry thought leaders, practitioners, and experts focused on improving B2C experiences through powerful data-driven insights. It's about how we connect with our consumers and where we can partner together to do it better. This is the Marketing Rapport.
All right, we're here with Andy Davidson. I'm so excited to have the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Bright Mountain. So Andy, I know Bright Mountain and some of the different business units, but if you could just explain to everyone sort of what you guys do and how you fit into this ecosystem of analytics and insights and research and strategy.
Sure. Good morning. It's great to talk to you. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So Bright Mountain is a publicly traded end-to-end marketing services platform. So we provide services at every stage of the marketing workflow, starting with research and insights. We have agency services, both creative and media. We help deploy campaigns, and we curate media and help publishers monetize media.
So what does Andy do? So when you go to see your in-laws on Christmas, what do you tell them you do?
Yeah, that's always challenging. So I am the Chief Data and Analytics Officer for Bright Mountain, but I am also the Managing Director for our research function, Big Village. So my responsibilities are essentially to lead the research business. We provide market research and analytics services to brands and mostly agencies in the marketplace, and then help connect the output of those services to other areas of focus for us as an enterprise. So I mentioned earlier that we provide media and creative services. We also help publishers curate and monetize their inventory, and we actually deploy media campaigns through advertising technology. So my job is to run the research business, help brands and agencies make important decisions about how to reach and communicate with their consumers, and then I help them translate those insights into effective marketing strategies.
So Andy, on the podcast, we've had a lot of guests that really were focused on, say, media and measurement or identity resolution or data. I've not had a lot of people that were focused on the research piece of it. Can you just go into sort of how that research informs insights?
Yeah, well, the way that I think about it is actually that market research actually generates insights. So market research, historically has always played a really important role in the marketing workflow. It's typically the first place that brands or agencies on their behalf or together go to understand their audiences, how those audiences make decisions, and ultimately how to effectively position their products with those audiences. And so market research can take on, a variety of different flavors. It can be qualitative in form, where you're having an informal conversation with a few people and not introducing a lot of structure in the way you ask questions. Alternatively, a lot of market research is much more rigorous and organized around specific questions with very specific scales that allow you to quantify needs and requirements in a specific vertical in a very rigorous fashion. And so, but at the end of the day, ultimately market research is the stage of the workflow that helps businesses and agencies ultimately make decisions about how to communicate and position their products and services with consumers or businesses for that matter.
So how do you overcome market research, like sort of sitting in a silo and no one really understanding or doing anything with that information?
Yeah, so it's interesting you bring that up because it's a really important focus for Bright Mountain and all of its all of its services and something we spend a lot of time talking about and investing in solutions to address. So for all intents and purposes, market research does a really good job at the remit that I described. For decades, it's really been effective at helping brands, parse out markets and approach them with personalized solutions. The problem historically has been what happens after the research is done, right? So, once research has defined audience requirements and provided guidance on how to position products, typically what then happens is that agencies and marketers need to figure out how to find those audiences in the wild, right? So they have to do things like understand their media habits and preferences, place bets on the most efficient way to reach those audiences, and effectively qualify them in real time across digital environments. So, it's probably doesn't come as a surprise to your listeners that, for some audiences, a social heavy strategy is the appropriate solution for outreach. With other audiences, the outreach strategy could look entirely different. It might lean more heavily into connected television or into broadcast television. And so, those are the kinds of decisions that marketers and their agencies ultimately need to pick up on once the research is done. And the problem has been that the audience requirements, as defined by the research, typically can't be onboarded effectively to the systems that the marketers and the agencies ultimately need to rely on to help them with the steps that I just described. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We have a pretty well-known travel destination who's a client of ours. And, one of the segments that they target is a travel segment that prioritizes luxury, right, over other travel requirements. And there are lots of other segments in the travel marketplace, many of them not terribly interested in luxury, but this particular segment prioritizes luxury. And so historically, with a segment like that, the planning, the activation strategy would ultimately be sort of diluted to targeting females because that segment skews female. Another example, a banking segment that prioritizes service might skew older, and so plans would typically be built around an older generation. Another example, a retail segment that prioritizes price might skew lower income, and so ultimately the campaign plan and the campaign strategy might ultimately target lower household income. The problem with all of those strategies is that if you think about the campaigns that ultimately go to market, they're not really targeting or the audiences that came out of the research, right? They're targeting some of those audiences, but they're also leaving a lot behind. And so in all of these cases, you essentially have a dilution of the audience requirements, as you move from research to subsequent phases of the process, to planning, ultimately to activation, and then even to measurement. At each stage of at each transition, there's essentially this loss in fidelity of the strategy, and ultimately that leads to waste and lower than expected ROI or lower than preferred ROI. So that's a problem that we invest a lot of time in. We've built technology to address that problem, and we go to market as an end-to-end set of services that is designed to address that problem.
So Andy, can you go back to like sort of when you say research, like how are you gathering all this research? And is it consumer surveys? Is it email outreach? Like how do you get that and then connect the dots to how do you pull the insights out of there?
Sure. So market research is typically done either among customers of a brand, of an advertiser, or among their prospects. Typically, customer research can be done with a customer database. If the brand curates a customer list and they have an ongoing relationship with their customers, oftentimes you can do the research directly with their database. They usually have email addresses. Emails are sent out to invite those customers to participate in a survey or in a focus group, and that's how we collect the data, ask the questions, collect the data, and then derive insights about customer behavior and customer preferences from those questions and from that data. Another approach to doing market research involves leveraging what's commonly referred to as market research panels that are pretty prominent in the industry. And so there are a number of providers out there who are in the business of recruiting people to take surveys and incenting them to take those surveys on a regular basis. And so typically when we're doing market research on behalf of a client, we will use one of those two methods to execute the research. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes it can take the form of a survey. Sometimes it can take the form of a more unstructured experience, a focus group, or an online discussion in a forum. Sometimes it can be both.
That's why thank you for walking me through that. I love your company because you've got the research and insights to it. Then you've also got the analytics piece, and you can set the strategy. You can do the communication and the media activation. So I don't know where you start. Probably you start with research, but it's like this great circle. So Andy, you've mentioned data a couple of times. I'm just going to pull a couple quotes from your website where it says data without media or media without data will be at a disadvantage. And the other one I really like is you say, not you, the Big Mountain says, companies with consumer-driven data at the core will win. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of data as a foundation and how it feeds everything that you do towards getting an outcome or a execution on a strategy?
Yeah, it's. Let me see if I can find a way to describe this very simply. So at the end of the day, every market is heterogeneous. No market is homogeneous. So in other words, every market consists of, at least 4, sometimes 5 distinct groups of people who have very unique sets of requirements as it relates to, the product or service in question. And so really at the end of the day, what market research and analytics and data more generally allows us to do is to personalize outreach and personalize service and communication to the needs of a specific market segment and not to the needs of some other market segment. And so, the way it's often described is, one approach to outreach is spray and pray, right? You basically send the same message to everybody. Another approach to outreach is personalized outreach, where you're customizing the message and the offer to the specific needs of that market segment. So, we believe obviously in the latter, and where we have invested and prioritized our focus is on ensuring that the data is available at every stage of the workflow to enable that personalized outreach, and that the transitions between each stage of the workflow are done seamlessly so that the fidelity of the strategies is preserved all the way through to execution.
And we've spent a fair amount of time on this podcast about personalization because I think it's the two things that I find really important are personalization, but also understanding who the consumer is. So you can market to someone a lot easier if you know who they are.
Totally.
And they'll like that marketing if you personalize it in a way that is on their terms. Do you have any examples with any customers you've worked with where you've suggested or helped them with personalization or helped them with, target audience segmentation?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in some way, shape, or form, we help all of our clients with that. But a couple of examples, I mentioned the destination the Caribbean destination that we work with and have been working with for 4 or 5 years.
Oh, Andy, I'm sorry. When you were talking about a exclusive travel destination, I thought you were talking about my hometown, Grand Rapids, Michigan. You're actually talking about the Caribbean?
No.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
all my listeners from Michigan, my family members, will be tuning out right now. Go ahead with
I have not
Caribbean.
worked for the Tourism Association of Grand Rapids, Michigan, but I look forward to their call.
There's your prospect. See, I'm a giver.
Yeah. So this particular client is a Caribbean destination, and for obvious reasons is a lot of fun to work with. But in any event, we one of the things that we have done for them or did for them was we we help them develop their audience strategy. And so, very simply, what we did was we went out and very carefully tried to understand the requirements of affluent travelers, which, as I mentioned earlier, are not uniform. There are a variety of different types of travelers. Some travelers prefer luxury. Some travelers prioritize, the food scene. Some travelers prioritize family. And so, what we have done for this destination is help them to understand, not only what are the variety of different requirements, but ultimately how do we go about communicating with them in a way that will, properly position the destination, and then how do we reach them? Not only, where should we prioritize marketing investments, but ultimately when I come across someone in a digital environment, how can I be confident in the requirements of that particular individual and make the right choice in terms of what advertising to serve them? So there's one example. We've conducted similar exercises for, lots of different other businesses and lots of different verticals. We've done similar work in retail. We've done similar work in financial services. Financial services is probably an area where I over-index because I spent some time in-house at Bank of America, and so I know that industry very well. Needs in that industry can vary from prioritizing rates to prioritizing sort of features and benefits and perks of payment options. There's, like any other market, there's lots of different requirements in that market, in the financial services market, and what we've done for a number of clients is help them to understand what those requirements are, and then help them develop communication plans to target each of those segments effectively.
So, Andy, so that your answer sort of drives me to my next question is, when you're meeting with customers or prospects, what are some of the number one challenges that they're saying, hey, we need help with this? Because it seems like you could solve for a lot of things. And when you have a lot of things, it's hard to offer all that at one time. So like, how do people want, like, maybe get into Big Village? What's that challenge that you're seeing over and over again with businesses these days?
Yeah, it's a variety of things. I think one of them is, understanding their markets. Believe it or not, I think a lot of businesses struggle with that. That's one. Two is moving fast. In this day and age, agility is the priority, and whereas in the past, a lot of businesses could afford to, dedicate, significant periods of time to making sure that they made the right decision. That's just not the reality these days. So speed and agility are really important. And then actionability is probably the most important. And that sort of comes back to, the problem I was talking about earlier. Most of us in the market research industry do a really, really good job of helping our clients make really good decisions with data. It's what happens afterward that we've not done as good of a job at. And, and that's one of the things that, brands and agencies struggle a lot with. And until recently, haven't had a lot of viable solutions. And I'd like to think that, the solutions that we've built, are finally providing the help that these constituents need to actually drive higher ROI and reduce waste.
So Andy, this is a good part or a good point to talk about your solutions, because we actually work together, or
Yep.
we help you with one of your solutions, and one that you're, making I don't know if by the time this airs, I think the announcement will already be out, but your audience intelligence platform. Can you talk a little bit about what that does and how Verus Marketing Solutions can help sort of power that?
Yeah, I'll answer the question, a little bit of a different question than the one you asked. And I think that, the question I will answer is, why do we partner with Verisk, and why are you a really important relationship to us? And the answer to that question is that, you're essentially providing us with the ability to connect the different stages of the workflow that I was talking about earlier. So, getting a little bit technical here for a second, if you think about different stages of the workflow, so you've got research, you've got the planning phase that I talked about, you've got, the activation stage that I talked about, and then ultimately you've got measurement. Each of those stages of the workflow are owned by different constituents, in the marketplace. The research is typically owned by the brand and their agency partners. The planning phase is typically owned by media and creative agencies. Activation is usually owned by advertising technology partners, and then ultimately measurement is owned by everyone. Each of those different stages of the workflow sit on different data systems. So for example, market research is typically conducted with a representative sample of a customer base. A planning system is another data set. It's a data set that provides insight on how what people's media preferences are, and what kind of media they consume. The digital activation platforms, they sit on yet another data set, all the data that's underneath the internet, and so forth. And so, what Verisk and your partnership allow us to do is create a thread through all of those different phases of the workflow. You're essentially the crosswalk that we use to translate research into planning instruments, and then ultimately into activation, and ultimately into measurement. And so it's a really critical partnership, and one that we're really proud to be in.
Could you check your email? I just sent you a DocuSign for a 3-year. So, and there's more to come. We're doing a press release, so that this is a really good thing, and I value this partnership and sort of the cool things that allows that working with a great company like you affords us. I do want to let you know you are the first bona fide professor, doctor on my podcast. So congratulations. You're going to get your mug that you are there. So the things we have in common, we both teach undergrad, graduate level courses. And I want to know, have you gotten your professorial class ranking from your students yet? Have you gone in there to see how they think about you?
So two things. First of all, you and I both cringe at the reference to professor.
Yes, you do. No, I like it.
Oh, you like
I want
it?
them
Okay.
to.
I don't like it. And the answer to your question is no, I have not gone to read my feedback because I don't want to see it.
To read. It's hard to read.
Yeah, I don't want to see it. Maybe someday, but you can look at mine if you want. I'm not looking at mine.
So, Andy, as we wrap up, how can people either find you or get more information about Big Mountain, Big Village, what you guys do? Where can people go?
You can go to brightmountainmedia.com, bigvillageinsights.com, and maybe we can post the links in the podcast. I'm on LinkedIn. Anybody listening to this podcast who wants to connect, I'm on LinkedIn, Andy Davidson, and so we're pretty easy to find, and I look forward to hearing from folks if you're interested in talking.
Andy, thanks for being on the podcast. I've learned a ton. I hope everyone else has enjoyed this, but from from research to insights to the data to the strategy, the execution, you guys have the market corner. So thanks for jumping on.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your partnership.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Marketing Report. This show is brought to you by Verisk Marketing Solutions, an organization created to help CMOs and their partners improve the reach, timing, relevance, and compliance of every consumer engagement. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to the Marketing Report wherever you get your podcasts, and check out the show notes for more information.